Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you come, from where you join. Thank you, Jeremy, for introduction. In the next 15 minutes, I would like to talk about the future of Apache Ignite, as the title of this presentation goes, but really concentrate on conversation about simplicity, something that has been an important, at least for me and for the community, for the last couple of years. It's going to be an unusual conversation. We typically talk about the features and some of the technology behind Ignite, and with Ignite 3.0, there's plenty of subject matter to talk about. But today I want to concentrate on simplicity. Before we talk about what's going to be coming up with Apache Ignite, it's kind of interesting to look back. And for many of you who haven't been with Ignite and GridGain for quite some time, it may sound pretty interesting. So in early 2000s, mid 2000s, when I started this project, the simplicity was one of the key reasons I've started it. Back in those days, there was plenty of existing, high performance computing technology like the Synapse, the Grid server, the platforms and whatnot. And they were kind of all characterized as very complex to use. And one of the original goals of the original GridGain project before I joined Apache Software Foundation was to really bring that technology, but with a much simplified user experience. Some of you will remember that back in those days, the Java ecosystem had what's called enterprise Java beans. And just around the same time, the Spring project came along and dramatically simplified that enterprise usage of Java within enterprise. And my idea, frankly, was to do exactly the same thing for high performance computing. I was pretty versed in high performance computing existing technologies, and they had this tinge of you got to have a PhD to use something like this, and that really bothered me because fundamentally the ideas behind HPC were fairly simple. It's your typical parallel processing, and I wanted to marry this with in-memory computing. So the original ideas of a GridGain project, more than 10 years ago, were all about bringing the simplified user experience to a fairly complex HPC ideas. So something like bringing the cutting-edge academic research to the enterprise. That original focus really gave the GridGain a certain boost and initial growth. And by the time the project really joined Apache Software Foundation, it was already experiencing a rapid feature growth. The project already had a number of pretty heavy hitting users, pretty significant workloads, and it started to grow in features. And this is the time when I believe where the focus on simplicity has really started to dwindle. And that's very natural. It's a very natural evolution of any middleware software project. As it growth, your customers, your users starting to demand more and more of enterprise features, more and more of kind of, this high-end features. And in a rush to develop them, the user experience simplicity often takes a kind of a second row seat. In the same time, in kind of the same 2010, I would say 15 time frame, we've added the data grid technology, transaction service grid, cloud deployment, a lot of growth in terms of the feature and complexity. And that's where I truly believe the kind of original focus on simplicity sort of went sideways. And if you look in the last 5-6 years, there's no question that that trend only accelerated. The project has grown tremendously. Today, Ignite technology powers the most demanding high-end systems in the world, from banks to manufacturing to all kinds of use cases. Complexity grew many times. And quite clearly today, Ignite has, that unfortunate tinge about it that, this is a fairly complex project to use. And that has been bothering me and not only me, obviously, the community in general, that it doesn't have to be. Just because we have a large set of enterprise features doesn't mean that it has to be complex to use. And this complexity comes not only particular feature, but it basically comes from a variety of different factors. Sometimes not directly related to the project itself, documentation, configuration, how easy it is to launch it on the cloud, and things like this, the Kubernetes, for example, integration. There's a lot of different aspects to what an effective and efficient user experience is. So this is a look back, and although this slide says 2022 plus, I definitely believe that the community started this sort of a back to roots movement just a few years back, when most of us kind of realized, we finally have enough customers, enough users that, we kind of see the trend. And if you ask anybody in the community, they'll tell you that Ignite gives tremendous power, but it requires, it's not an easy project to get started with. And I've been sort of vocal proponent of the idea that we need to address this. And I do fundamentally believe we need to renew focus on the first touch basics. And this is a very key phrase. We need to make sure that not only an experienced users can really benefit from Ignite, but people who just downloaded Ignite and wanted to play with it, in the evening or two and just see the examples, they have to be efficient and productive. And that means many different things. We talk about installation, both on-prem and cloud. We're talking about configuration, example, documentation, and available training and education, all of that. It's also pretty clear that the further growth of the project requires, fairly mass adoption. And mass adoption in the software unequivocally means a simpler usage pattern. There's not a single piece of software that is complex to use that has been widely adopted. It's very natural. It goes through any type of software, from consumer to enterprise. So if we want to see in the community, obviously wanted to see further and further growth of the project, we need to work on simplifying the usage pattern. By the way, this is exactly the same trend that helps other projects in Apache, community, from Kafka and Confluence to Spark and Cassandra. They all went and are going through the same sort of a route. The feature growth, especially going into the Ignite 3.0, should really be balanced with the focus on the user experience. There are typical, the player one users, essentially this transition from the novice credentials downloaded to, being productive, has to be an absolutely important, just as important as the features and the user experience of a long-time production customers. So in the end, in the last couple of years, we essentially identified the several directions where this kind of getting back to roots with simplicity will take hold. And it's Apache 3.0. We'll talk about it just briefly. And obviously, by the way, this effort is not only for community. I mean, there's many things that just community cannot do. It requires some commercial backing. So I do believe it's going to be the combination of the community work, specifically in Ignite 3.0, and also the commercial backers. And here I can talk from the GridGain side of things. So I do believe that this push for the simple usage, for simpler usage, will come predominantly from Ignite 3.0 and from some initiatives like GridGain Nebula and GridGain University. And we'll talk about that. So GridGain 3.0, if you're part of a community, you've heard most of it. The Ignite 3.0, besides features, and there's quite a few new directions, it actually, the focus of it, if you kind of read through the dev list of the community, it's really focused on removing ambiguity and duplication in the APIs, making things opinionated, introducing materialization, the brand new installation and configuration, all kind of in the changes, sometimes backward incompatible changes, but they all strive to achieve the simple goal is to simplify the initial usage and overall usage of Apache Ignite. This is probably the most important thing we're trying to do with the Ignite 3.0. I want to basically remind everybody that essentially the Ignite's code base haven't been updated since mid-2000s. It's basically the same sort of architecture and the code base. And a lot of things have changed since then. Not only projects have changed, the certain expectations from a developer community have changed. And Ignite 3.0 is taking that look and many different things. Sometimes painful look because the change is going to be not backward compatible in many places. But those are absolutely necessary changes. Obviously, Ignite 3.0 introduced a lot of next generation features. We're not going to talk about here, but we've been, community has been very open about what's being worked on, the GPU, CMD optimization, Optane support, naturally columnar store, the whole kind of pluggable data storage layer, the new transaction architecture and cloud native support, all of that. What's also interesting in light of today's conversation, there's a lot of technical debt that's being addressed in Ignite 3.0. It's kind of coincide with the first point I made, but there's a significant amount, as I mentioned. There's some of the code base is more than 10 years old. It's stable, it's fine, but it's inevitable that it basically gets surrounded by a lot of kind of technical debt that we need to take a look. It's also remember that it was a lot of discussion in the community about the backward compatibility 3.0, and we decided to essentially break that compatibility to really clean up a lot of different things and improve from a simplistic standpoint. So no gain, no pain. No pain, no gain, as a matter of fact. Some of those changes are going to be, again, very, very important. In the same time, I do believe that community that's behind Ignite 3.0 is really cognizant about the fact that we have hundreds of top tier users in the world. The most sophisticated systems runs on GridGain, and we have to maintain level of stability and availability. That's, I think, will be there. Another interesting, now we're talking about something that GridGain commercially does is in the last, let's say, 5 years, we've seen and heard a lot of complaints that it's kind of hard to get started with Ignite or GridGain, doesn't really matter. And sometimes it's just configurations. Sometimes it's just literally, who's got, 20 servers laying around. If you're a large company, you may have something like this, but if you're just starting out or a small startup or just trying to play around, it's often kind of, awkward to source this computer. So obviously go to the cloud and rent this out, and it's all kind of convoluted in a certain degree, and you have to go through steps and whatnot. And so the GridGain Nebula really solves that. It's a pure SaaS offering. You go, you click a few buttons, and in a matter of minutes, you have your cluster, and it's all Ignite. So you can basically just continue to use Ignite and continue to use Nebula. It has a free tier, as a matter of fact, although it's a commercial offering, but it's a very much in the suit to Apache Ignite users. It gives you tremendous visibility and management capabilities into both compute grid, data grids, your caches. You can run SQL through it, so you can run and monitor large clusters. It's a very advanced solution. And we've seen firsthand that it reduces kind of days and even weeks of configuration and management and routines into really just minutes. Quite literally, you can go today, it's live today, it's available. Here's the URL on the bottom of the slide. You can find it from GridGain website, and it's in my opinion, it's one of the best ways, if not the best way, to run Apache Ignite in the cloud. If you run something like this, if you run more than 1 or 2 nodes, this is probably one of the best ways. And this is basically a commercial vendor's view on dramatically simplifying some of the most complicated and convoluted parts of GridGain usage. The last thing I want to mention is that something we launched pretty recently, and that's really trying to formalize and centralize the whole idea of documentation, training, certification, tutorials, all of that under the single e-learning platform for Apache Ignite and GridGain. This is a tremendous effort that we're sponsoring here at GridGain. It's available today. It's live today. We're going to continue to invest in the courses that's going to be available. Many of the courses will be free, and that's the kind of investment back in the community. So I welcome everybody to look at the GridGain University and really treat it as a central point for all things Apache Ignite and GridGain in terms of educational, certification, training. All of that is self-paced, in online. You can do it at your own pace, at your own rhythm. You can go all the different ways you like it. It's a great, great place to really start learning about Apache Ignite and GridGain. So with that, I want to thank you, and I want to welcome to Ignite Summit to all of you. I hope you find interesting talks, and thank you very much.
Welcome back. Thanks, Nikita. What we're going to do now is have a couple of questions and answers. Firstly, let me ask you a question. Having been through all this, and it's now been, how long has it been since you handed over to the Apache Foundation? It's about 8 years or 7 years?
Actually more. I think it's more. I don't remember exactly, but I think it's about 10 years at this point.
So
actually, no, it's less than that. It's about 8 years. You're right.
Okay, so if you had to go through all of that again, if you had to do all that again, would you have done it any differently from the point of view of the way you approached it and from the point of view of architecturally?
Yes, look, I mean, this presentation, actually, this topic, let's talk about this topic of simplicity. That's actually, when I say it's bothering me, it's actually very honest statement. I mean, I mean it, things that I've said, just a few minutes ago, I mean it sincerely. There is no hope for any project if it basically just simply too complex to use. You're always going to find a core audience to use. You're always going to find very smart people, very dedicated people who basically just grok it. But that's always going to be a niche thing. And if you want to have a mass adoption, mass appeal, in a good sense, I'm not talking about something cheap here. I always bring back the example of Hadoop. It's not a simple technology, but if you look what Cloudera did when it actually was in the height, the Cloudera University specifically was essentially a learning hub for this entire planet when it comes to Hadoop technology. And it dramatically helped to democratize the usage of fairly complex stuff. And so I truly believe the simple user experience, effective, not simplistic. We should draw a very careful line here. But simple, effective, productive user experience is extremely important for a project growth and acceptance. And yes, if I would, have a time machine, which we know does not exist, unfortunately, going back, but if I would definitely had that thought 5-6 years before. And I think I would really concentrate on user experience much, much earlier. Because right now it requires some surgical changes.
Final question then for you. Do you have any advice for anybody who's starting out with an Apache Ignite project now?
Well, my advice would be probably nothing very special. Despite kind of my criticism of some documentation, some simplicity, Apache Ignite has a pretty robust, entry-level documentation with examples and whatnot. And I would always recommend, you don't need to have 20 servers lying around. You can just grab your laptop and you can run dozens of nodes on the laptop. So you can actually have a pretty significant cluster and really kind of dive into the pretty modern, and I would say cutting-edge distributed processing computing right on your laptop. Look at our examples. Look at our examples on the Apache Ignite project. They're very decent. our example base is very nice and very good. So there's nothing special. Just allocate a couple of evenings, dive into examples. I always recommend start with the compute grid. This is the one that we kind of get you really kind of hooked up on ideas of distributed and parallel processing computing. That's actually what, excited me many, many, many years ago in the middle of 90s when I first time seen it. And this is the great way to start.